Hello, everyone who's just come in Zoom world. And to all of you who are viewing us on YouTube live stream, welcome, come on in. I want to give a big thanks and a shout out to Michael Davis for that excellent guitar playing. It's classical guitar. It is a regular feature when we're at the Writers Center in Bethesda, Maryland. And we really missed that live venue, but Michael, we love your music. So I am Henry Crawford, and welcome to the March 2021 edition of Café Muse Online. Tonight, we are featuring poets Jane Clarke and Terri Ellen Cross Davis. My co-hosts helping me with the show tonight are Ellen Cole and Karen Alanier. Before we begin, I want to thank the WordWorks and everyone here for coming out and joining us tonight. Okay, let's get started. First, and most importantly, we want you to purchase the poet's books. So I will put a link into the chat that will take you to the places where you can purchase the books of each of our poets tonight. We also have a donation button on that page, so don't feel shy about donating to our program. We at WordWorks and Café Muse will thank you wholeheartedly for your donations. I'll also put into the chat a link where you can follow all of our WordWorks readings online, sign up on the registration form, and you'll be on our mailing list to get Zoom links for all of our programs and readings. Now, if you want to ask a question of our poets, please feel free to drop a question into the chat, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we have time. Sometimes we have a shy group of people here, and we are looking for questions at the end. So be bold, go out and ask them as they occur to you. A couple more things. Please join us on Wednesday, March 24, 2021, when our series Poets versus the Pandemic will be presenting poets Luther Jett, reading from his new book, Everyone Disappears, along with guest poets Sherry, Lawrence Flieger, and Carolyn Wright. And we'll be back here again with Café Muse on April 5, 2021 with Marguerite Little and Joseph Ross. So tonight, I am given the honor of introducing Jane Clarke. Jane Clarke is an Irish writer, educator, and the author of the acclaimed poetry collections, The River and When the Tree Falls. Clarke's awards include the 2016 Hennessy Literary Award for Poetry and the 2016 Listowel Writers' Week Poem of the Year. Of All the Way Home, one reviewer writes, "It's Clarke's ability to render the immense intimate and the intimate immense that is the achievement of this quietly passionate work." The same could be said of all of Clarke's poems. She has the gift of making you feel that you're sitting in a quiet corner with her, listening to cherished memories into which are embedded the universal themes of gender equality, justice, war, and death. Her poems are so alluring and lyrical that it seems as if she's right there singing them to you. And she's coming to us tonight from several time zones away in Ireland. So let's give a very big Café Muse Online welcome to poet Jane Clarke.
Thanks so much, Henry, and it's great to be here. And thank you to everybody in Café Muse for organizing tonight, and to Terri for the original invitation to read with her. It's my third time now to read with Terri. We read first in DC a number of years ago, courtesy of Solas Nua, the Irish arts organisation, then in Dublin, courtesy of Poetry Ireland, and here we are, transatlantic. So I'm going to read from both collections that Henry mentioned, and the first one came out, The River, came out in 2015. They're both published by Blood Axe Books in the UK. And I thought I'd start with two love poems. And the first is kind of exploring, how does one fall in love? How did we fall in love? When I knew. Because you cannot think of a better way to pass the quiet time. You ask me when I knew. I can hardly remember. Was it a bolt from the blue discovery, like finding a rowan in the forest, thrown backwards in an out of season storm? Roots loosened, buds opening, its lattice branches spread wide, leaves ready to unfurl. Or was it how celandines, violets, columbine, buttercups and sorrel find their way into a neglected space without any fanfare, going unnoticed until one morning after a quarrel, they seem to be calling your name. And the second love poem is from much later in our relationship, and it's when Isabel and I are married. And we had to wait nearly 20 years to be able to get married, waiting for marriage equality in Ireland. And so that sort of explains the thinking behind the poem, that it's not quite the same as getting married after 2 or 3 years together. Vows. I can't promise it's chiseled from gold in spirals that speak of forever. I can't tell you it's wise as a mountain with pines that reach for heaven. I can't promise it's flawless as honey gathered by bees in bell heather. I can't say it's simple as silk spun from cocoon into treasure, but I promise it's rooted as rowan with berries that sing to September. I promise its to and its fro will surprise like Glenmalure weather. A seasoned rowboat, moored or unmoored at your pleasure. So the mention of Glenmalure there reminds me to tell you that I'm reading from Glenmalure tonight, which is in County Wicklow, which is about 40 miles south of Dublin, for those of you who don't know it. It's actually only about 15 minutes from Glendalough, and many of you will know Glendalough, I imagine. So then the third poem I'm just going to read from the first collection, The River, was actually inspired by my grandmother's story. She grew up on the north coast of Donegal, Portnabla, a little place called Portnabla, and her mother died when she was about 7 or 8. And so this poem is responding to that. Among the cows. Her father knew where to find her. She liked to stand among the cows. They smelled of winter and the dark. They let her lean into their warm bellies. She watched them in the fields as they moved solid and slow, wrapped their tongues around sweet grass. She found her own tune in their lowing, learned to milk as soon as her hands were strong enough to squeeze. When her mother died, her father wore his grief the way he wore his Sunday suit, as if it belonged to someone else. She would listen to the calves calling for days when weaned, until their voices, exhausted, faded like mist from the fields. So I'm going to read from my second collection, When the Tree Falls. And so I'm going to read a few poems from it, and then I'll read some more recent poems, 3 final recent poems. So this book came out in 2019, and actually I went to DC as part of the launch of the book and had a whole series of readings there and in New York to celebrate the launch of the book. So it feels like I'm bringing the book back to DC tonight with this reading. an important theme in this book is my father's illness, his death, and my mourning. But this is from earlier on in his illness, that I could take away from him these long days in the hospital, the digging for a vein in his arm, the drip that stops him sleeping, the pain that makes him whisper, Jesus Christ, oh Jesus Christ. That I could take him back to his cobblestones and barn, his rooks in the birch trees, his nettles and ditches, limestone and bog. That I could find the words to tell him what he will always be. Horse chestnut petals falling pink in the yard, the well hidden in a blackthorn thicket, a summer evening's hush, cattle standing orange in the shallows. And then from this poem is from the months when we nursed my father at home. And that's all I need to say about it. I've got you. Through days of morphine and titbits to tempt his appetite, there's nowhere else to be. I hold his teacup to his lips, wash his face and the hands I rarely touched. During the night, old hurts and worries surface like stones in a well-tilled field. What time is it now, he asks on the hour. He sings to himself and murmurs lines he learned as a child. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way. When he asks to get up, I hold his wrists, brace my weight against his. For a moment, he's confused. It's okay, Janie. I've got you. Go on now. You can stand. So I also wanted to read two poems for my mother. And the first of these is, I suppose it's really exploring the complexity of the mother-daughter relationship. It's an attempt to explore that complexity, the trouble. The trouble between mothers and daughters is how to forgive the one to whom you owe too much. What you see when you look in the mirror, how you forget you were in her and she is in you, or the way she loves you and cannot, will not leave you alone. And this one I wanted to read because, of course, this day next week is International Women's Day. And my mother made me into a feminist, even though she wouldn't even have called it that. But she wanted me to be independent. She wanted me to have an education. And in a way, she had her things that she hadn't had a chance to have in her life. She wanted to make sure I had them. And at the same time, she passed on lots of the wonderful traditional skills that she had learned. Hers. My mother said she just knew I was going to be a girl. 2 boys before me and 2 boys after, fodder for a hungry farm. But I was hers. She taught me her tricks of the trade. It looked like dinner is nearly ready if the table is set when he comes in. Bread and butter will fill them up. Add 3 drops of vinegar to water so your mirrors and windows will gleam. Cool your fingers before rubbing lard into flour for pastry. A handful of ground almonds will keep your fruitcake moist. Darn a few socks every night and never leave the ironing for more than a week. Don't cut off rhubarb stalks with a knife, just twist it clean from the crown. And always hold on to the children's allowance. A woman must have something of her own. So those I thought now I'll read some newer poems, and I suppose poetry it's an opportunity to celebrate. It's an opportunity to celebrate what you love in life, what you appreciate, and it often gives you a chance to pay tribute to people that have been important to you. And in this poem, I paid tribute to a dog that was very important in our lives. The Lookout. Neither wind nor rain would stop him lying in wait on the garden wall. An hour or more till he spotted the yellow school bus at the top of the road. When he heard us laughing, shouting, squabbling, he'd jump barking to the gravel and run to gather his flock of 5. The evening he arrived in the kitchen, the runt from our uncle's best collie. He had peed on the tiles, but never again until near the end, when his legs wouldn't carry him to the back door. Long after he taught us all he knew about love that waits in the wind and rain. And as I was saying, poetry allows us to celebrate. It also allows us to mourn, and it allows us to connect with each other. And this past year, more than ever in my lifetime, I have seen people reach for poetry, and I've seen people reach out to each other through poetry. And I've had some very moving events online. Amazingly, what we have been able to do online, the kind of intimacy we have been able to create online. And that's been really invaluable for me as a poet, you know, as a reading like tonight is, because it encourages you. But when I speak about mourning, that brings me to this poem, because this poem was written early in COVID times, when a neighbour of ours died and we couldn't attend the funeral. And as you know, people know, funerals and wakes are so important in Irish culture. All we could do was stand at our gateways and watch the hearse as a way of paying respect. So this poem is from a moment of that back last April. First Earlies. By rights, we should be standing side by side, making idle conversation as we wait to shake hands with grieving neighbours after Requiem Mass in Green Anne. But we keep the byroad between us today. The virus lingers, a low-lying cloud, until someone asks about planting first earlies, and advice flies from gateway to gateway. You can split seed potatoes as long as each half has a chit. Dig plenty of manure into the drill. Place them a foot apart, a fist deep. Don't forget to earth up the shoots. They'll be ready for lifting mid-June. Sharps Express, Setanta, Orla, Slaney, Redcara, Accord, our litanies only hushed by the hearse coming down the road. And I'm just going to have two more poems. I suppose this one now is another poem that I wrote in response to COVID. And I was asked to write this poem for Irish television, and it was put out in the end of August. And I suppose it's a poem about hope. And we didn't know then all we were still going to be going through, but I do feel that there's more hope in the world now. And so I wanted to read this one tonight. Little Tern Colony, Kilcool. In shallow nests among pebbles, most of the eggs survived the high tides. August slips into September. The fledglings, light as whelk shells, get ready to fly. The sun and stars will guide them, and though they'll be hungry, thirsty, cold, the earth's magnetic field will pulse in their hearts like hope. And then I think I have time for just one last poem, and it's the title poem of my first collection. And I suppose I'm reading it tonight to acknowledge the people who have lost so much in the past year, who have lost people they've loved in the past year. And this is a kind of a meditation on grieving. The river. What surprises me now is not that you're gone, but how I go on without you, as if I had lost no more than a finger. My hand still strong, perhaps stronger, can do what it must, by carving your name on a branch from the beach by the suck, letting the river take you, so I can call myself free. Only sometimes, like yesterday, last night, the day before, or this morning, the river flows backwards, uphill to my door. Thank you very much, everybody.
Poet Jane Clarke, thank you so much. You really caught the pulse of the Earth's magnetic field. Thank you. Thank you so much. And now let me bring on Ellen Cole, who will introduce Terri Cross Davis. Ellen, take it away.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ellen Cole. And Jane, that was just lovely. I was so glad I got to hear it. Now I'm going to introduce our next poet, Terri Ellen Cross Davis. Terri, I'm usually sitting in the audience at the Folger, listening to you introduce other very prominent, wonderful poets. So I feel particularly honored to be able to introduce you tonight to our audience. Terri Ellen Cross Davis is the author of two poetry collections, Hate, which looks like this, which was her debut collection, and her brand new book, A More Perfect Union. A More Perfect Union was just published a few weeks ago by the Ohio State University Press. Terri is also one of 6 poets who published an anthology, Not Without Our Laughter, Poems of Joy, Humor, and Sexuality, by the Black Ladies Brunch Collective. Her work has been anthologized in Bum Rush the Page, Bum Rush the Page, a deaf poetry jam. Check the Rhyme, an anthology of female poets and MCs, and the Golden Shovel Anthology, new poems honoring Gwendolyn Brooks. Her poems have appeared in many literary journals, including the Harvard Review, Kenyon Review, the Little Patuxent Review, Beltway Quarterly, the Fledgling Rag, Poetry Ireland, Pacifica Literary Review, Rosebud Magazine, and Tin House. She's the poetry coordinator of the Folger Shakespeare Library, a Café Common Fellow, has received fellowships from the Virginia Center for the Performing Arts, the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, and is on the advisory council for the Split the Rock Poetry Festival. She's the winner of the Charles B. Wheeler Poetry Prize and the 2017 Ohio Anna Award for Poetry. I spent the weekend reading Haint and A More Perfect Union, and I couldn't put them down. These poems are urgent, intimate evocations of life as a Black woman in today's America. They're bold, heartbreakingly honest, sensual, and focused in so closely. You see the speaker of the poems on a cellular level. She writes about coming of age, sexuality, being a mother, violence, particularly against women, and also about love and great tenderness. Her language is vivid, musical, and intense. Reviewer Tihama Jess, and I probably just mangled her first name, so I apologize for that, writes, Terri Ellen Cross Davis has written us a blood ode to Black motherhood, to love's primal ecstasy, to the rhythm and blues royalty of Prince, all prisoned through a seasoned awareness that is international in scope and homegirl, homegrown in its vernacular and dizzying heat. A More Perfect Union is an urgent outcry, a galactic guitar riff of blues that echoes in a turmoiled space between America's promise and the place where, and this is a quote from Terri, fear is always a whip or a white lady calling 911. So enough from me. I'm delighted to introduce you to poet Terri Ellen Cross Davis.
Well, from one Ellen to another, thank you, Ellen. That was a great introduction. And just Jane, like you're wrecking my makeup over here. I had to really wipe those tears away. But I could listen to you read every day, Jane. I really, really could. Thank you all. Thank you, Café Muse. Thank you, Karen Lanier. Thank you, Henry. Thank you. You all are, and Michael Davis, what wonderful guitar. I'm really excited to share this work with you tonight. Jane read a COVID poem, so I wanted to read one of the fairly very recent new poems I've written. And this one is called The Days Blur. The days blur as we self-quarantine to make less work for others. The days blur, the spot on the floor next to my bed, my feet land with a thud, and I am IT director, chef, housekeeper, nurse, and teleworker, all before 9 a.m. The days blur, my hand on backs, foreheads, my ears alert for coughing, thermometer at the hip like a gunslinger. The days blur, I touch my husband so I don't forget what it feels like. The days blur, from rain or crying, the world a watery vision framed by window panes. The days blur until it's midnight, 1 a.m. I've waited out the cacophony of children for a silence smothered in anxiety. Privilege is a house, the hum of a deep freezer, a steady job. The days blur and my waistband expands as my mind frays, needing a hymn. The days blur and the wound I am oozes, the scab yet to start. The days blur and racists fight for the right to be served. Humanity is a bauble and capitalism has slashed the price. The days blur as COVID types its initials on a new high score and doctors adjust the margins. The days blur and when I finally walk out my door, the world will be less, not more. So I am going to be reading everything, not everything, but everything will come out of A More Perfect Union tonight. And I'm really happy to share the Ireland poems. The times that I've been to Ireland, 2016 and 2017, were very fruitful. Getting a chance to see Jane and read with Jane. Um, I really love traveling to Ireland. So I'll start with this poem, which is called Blackberries, and it's in 3 parts, kind of runs the globe. Blackberries. 1, Whidbey Island, Washington. Leave it to the 70-year-old Black woman, her honey skin glowing, to tell me where the best blackberries grow on this island in the Puget Sound. Reaching into the circular bushes, cautious of the cane's red thorns, I hunt for the blackest berry, a ripeness betrayed by fattened drupelets, skin near bursting, purple streaking my fingers up to the elbows. Nature shows her work, clusters on biennial vines. No, the tender ones won't satisfy. Persist. Let your fingertips stroke the yielding weight of sweetness, a near hidden whisper of a kiss. Bloodberries, joyful and round, dappled in luster of late afternoon sun. 2, Limerick, Ireland. The blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice, I told my Irish friend, his speckled hand reaching deeper into a homegrown bush of currants, searching for the ripest for his Black American guest. The young ones, a blushed violet, bled streaks on his cream fingers, but he kept pushing past crimson, dark garnet until sweet midnight unveiled itself. The intermittent sun shed ribbons of yellow light over the River Shannon. The swimming swan's tragedy, a soul surviving gosling, all eclipsed by the black current, its tender rupture on the hilt of my tongue. 3, Mombasa, Kenya. With long braids and dark skin, few knew I wasn't Kenyan. Here, melanin was a blessing. The batik bikini, baby oil, equatorial sun. How black could I get? I never burned, only burnished strains of buttermilk blocking anything deeper. I could not have done this in the States. I would never call it tanning, having never been tan. But in Mombasa, druck on a camel, crossing the spilling evening sand, ocean surfed my cover band. I chased my color, taunted it to come out and play. Whenever I read this poem, I always have to explain that I love Ireland, so there's nothing against Ireland. And Aer Lingus is the major airline to and from Ireland. And this poem is called A Black Woman Gets a Window Seat on Aer Lingus. Enough, Ireland. For all your lush effusion of color, inside me blooms a masochistic loneliness. Give me the screws I know best, the policeman quick to test my, yes sir, as acidless. Trigger the Midwest. Never on the Bible school test was this. Crucifixion kills, not nails into feet or wrists, but the weight borne upon the breast. You suffocate slowly in your own flesh. As I return to the upright cross of the US, I breathe easier. I breathe less. So let's skip ahead. And because this poem was published in Poetry Ireland by the late Evan Bolin, I wanted to read this. And so I have to give you a trigger warning. It has a gay slur in here, a homophobic slur. So there's your warning. Don't act like a... On the train from Baltimore, a woman ignores her young son until his boredom makes mischief fun, and her unengaged gaze narrows, sharpens, before we all hear the slap, followed by words meant to bruise. Don't act like a faggot. Maybe years later, he will kiss a man and taste despair. Maybe years later, he will kick a man to hide his own fear. But none of these things will happen. But my own silence is cultivated by years of attempted interventions met with blistering invectives, my own verbal fumbles, trying not to judge while judging. I wonder how long it will take to embrace a masculinity not drenched in cowardice, its stench as strong as semen. I wonder how many years until we learn not discuss the instant flippant rebuke, but the joy of a boy dancing in his sister's princess dress. How the frills flounce as he runs down the hall, the pink spaghetti straps framing square shoulders, waiting to broaden and fill. Mm. So I'm going to skip ahead to a poem that's not an Ireland poem, but still um, one I don't read that often. And this is called The Goddess of Interracial Dating. Uh, and I should warn you that in the More Perfect Union, I created 9 goddesses. I just created my own goddesses because I felt like they needed to exist. And who's to say we can't do that? So, the goddess of interracial dating. I whisper caramel to his refined white sugar dreams. Melt the butter, swirl the cream. Let the salt of you settle into the crevices of his molars. His tongue a bulge in the pocket of his jaw, a tethered muscle chasing a taste just out of reach, a body he doesn't own. I take my responsibility seriously, but I cannot overcome his stupidity when he says, Black people always seem happy. I'm there when he walks you by the water fountain, his deep voice a seductive plea, tenderness when he dips his fingers into churning waters. I part his lips, tongue seeking to stir caramel. You are never his jungle, his dark continent to conquer, but my high priestess to entreat. If he wants melanin's cape to cover his offspring, he must take down your braids, grease your scalp. When he peers into the burnished amber of your eye, know that I have bound and anointed him with the dream of caramel. He must kneel to honor it. So back to Ireland. And this is called A Black Woman Learns Ireland's History by Bus. In that last trip to Ireland, I went with my good friend Saida Agostini, and we were reading from not just another day off, but Not Without Our Laughter, the BLBC anthology. And we had a great time, and we traveled a lot by bus. So here you go. A Black Woman Learns Ireland's History by Bus. It took a civil rights museum to lift the skirts of the maiden city of Derry. Here's where I saw her Seamus Heaney tattoo. Belfast, the stamp at the bottom of the Titanic. Here, I breathe in an industry defined by ghost. Then it's back to you, Dublin. How I got sweet on you, I do not know. Blame that ancestor long ago. Let's hope it was consensual. But the words that crawl your streets align with my fault lines. Neither of us accustomed to joy. On the road to Limerick, crumbling forts shimmer and shy away like mirages. On the River Shannon, swans play their part near King John's Castle. Here, Frederick Douglass honed his pleas for justice. Shivers dart down my bare brown arms. But it's Newgrange, where stacked ancient stones call my blood to rise. 2 times a year, the sun flings a season's new song into a quartz cavern. Here, lifetimes were spent, bent, building temples to echo eons. At the entrance, water collects in a giant rock's hollowed hand. A wizened man whispers to me, dip your fingers and touch what ails you. So I will read you this one, and then maybe we'll skip back to another goddess poem. This is called Don't Disturb This Groove, after the system in Galway, Ireland. Even with Galway beckoning, your kiss mixed with last night's wine was too intoxicating. If I could be this wanton and beautiful in your eyes, then let your hands find hollows slick with glee. Let your mouth meet mine between words, kissing sentences, tongues diagramming intention. Let the mirror frame the sight of our worn bodies reflecting a youthful, tempered energy. Let plans of tours and walks be replaced by clenched bed sheets, music masking moans, the surprise of ardor as swift and intense as lightning. Let our skin be framed in a slant of sunlight, sudden and sweet. Let us find not sleep at Knox Hotel, but never-ending bounty, breakfast of black pudding, bangers, and tea. Let the cab driver's Irish music of an accent greet us open and free, the stiff, cold Atlantic wind trying and failing to still our burnished flow. one more goddess poem. And this is the Goddess of Anger, which, you know, all I'll say is that as a Black woman, I often feel like I don't get a chance to be angry because I'm so afraid of fulfilling people's ideas of stereotypes of me as a Black woman. So to write this poem was freeing in so many ways. The Goddess of Anger. And I think also all women should pray to the Goddess of Anger. Just let her come in. Just let her do her work sometimes. The Goddess of Anger. Did he touch you? Did he hit you with jagged words or closed fists? Did he laugh at you? Were you polite even then? Were you lava under the skin? Then let me in. Unsheath the dagger of me. You've tasted pain, now let me master it. Let me in. I'll use the dust of his bones for tea. I'll rise, vengeful and caustic, a florid fury, steeped in seething. I'll make his eyes bleed. Let me in. I'll dissect him unflinchingly, a backhand slap, a rank of fingernails. I'll spit my small mercies. I'll dance on him in stilettos, paint my toenails OPI red while the blood congeals. Let me be your ignition point, your pitch, the whoosh of hot, sweet breath. I'm all your swallowed heat simmered into flesh. I, too, can lift burdens. Let go of fear, of retribution. Let go of decorum and shame. Ride rage until it bucks, then jump on it again. Damn it, let me in. And just two more. So this one is, and Jane, you read something, and this happens whenever we read together. Like sometimes, like the links happen. And when you read the poem about your father, and he's saying Jesus Christ, I was like, oh my gosh, here's that link again. So here's Thank You, Jesus. When the blue and red sirens pass you, when the school calls because your child beat the exam and not a classmate, when the smartphone drops but does not crack, the rush escaping your mouth betrays your upbringing. Thank you, Jesus. A balm over the wound. When the mammogram finds only density, when the playground tumble results in a bruise, not a broken bone, like steam from a hot tea kettle. Thank you, Jesus. And the pent up fear vents upward, out. Maybe it's a hand over breast, supplication learned deeper than flesh, as if one could shush the soul, the fluttering heartbeat, with 3 words. Maybe it's not so dire, an almost trip on the sidewalk, the accumulated sales total showing savings upon savings. Maybe it's as small as an empty seat on the metro, or maybe, thank you, Jesus, becomes the refrain every time your husband pulls into the driveway, alive and whole, and no one has mistaken him for all the Black scary things. You mutter it, helpless to stop yourself from the invocation of a grandmother who gave you your first Bible. You say it because your mother, even knowing your doubt as a vested commodity, still urges prayer. You learned early to cast the net. Thank you, Jesus. And it's a sweet needle that gathers the fraying thread, hemming security in steady stitches. From birth, you've heard this language. As an adult, you've seen religion used nakedly as ambition. Yet this sacrifice of praise still slips past your lips, this lyrical martyr of your dying faith. And because I often think of Ireland as a fiery place, I love the fire in Ireland's soul. I'll end with this poem, and that is, this poem suggests revolution. This poem no longer consents to play mammy or to wet nurse a seething rage at her own Black teat. America, your teeth have come in, you nip too much. This poem refuses to play religion. A Bible verse will not absolve you, America. If the pursuit of happiness, life, and liberty came from the Creator, she is about ready to backhand you in the face. This poem will not be your bottom bitch, America. This poem does not consent to Blackness being window dressing for the diversity brochure of a country where the board of directors never changed. This poem reads the fine print on you, America. This poem consents to be Black ink a clenched fist, pepper spray, and black souls marching on asphalt. Freedom for and from you, America. If need be, this poem consents to double as witness, the dotted I in the missing reparations decree. Until then, let this poem heckle you, America. Let it yell, "Goddamn, US," choke on cotton while fanning itself and the flames. Understand, this poem doesn't want to be bloodthirsty. It would rather write about the cleanse of a cloudburst than the vengeful force of a water hose. In truth, this poem courts hope. Like a volta, it asks, I'm sorry, one page skip. Sorry, we'll start this again. Like a volta, it wants to turn the page, writing, "America, let us pen a new document, not a perpetual union, but a chokehold removed, as a black throat breathing freely is a self-evident truth. Let these lines be facts submitted to a candid world. And this poem, when spoken or read, let it alter, let it abolish you." So there we are. That's everything from A More Perfect Union. So thank you all.
Terri, thank you for that gorgeous reading. It's really beautiful. Karen Elenier, the founder of our series, is going to come on next and lead the question and answer period. So Karen.
Thank you, Ellen. And we had two exceptionally, let's say, touching readers tonight, eliciting tears even. And I thought that maybe this question might tap into some of that. And that is, I'm asking you both, does tenderness come from an unknown well in your poems or from a long source of experience? And if you can't answer that question, you might think about well, who among your favorite poets was influencing you relative to your tenderness? Jane, you're on.
Thanks very much, Karen. I mean, first of all, just to say I love Terri's reading, and it was really wonderful. Tenderness. I didn't start writing until my early 40s, and I think that affected the way I write and what I write and where it comes out of. And I think tenderness can come out of suffering. And I think tenderness can come out of it. Makes me think of Naomi Shihab Nye's poem "Kindness." You know, the one about to be kind. You have to meet kindness. And I think maybe tenderness comes like that. That it comes from hard things, from suffering, and but from opening your heart rather than closing your heart because of suffering. That's what comes to mind at the moment, anyway. Yeah.
Interesting enough, as I was thinking about it, when I think of tenderness, I kind of think of vulnerability. And I think, Lucille Clifton is my all-time favorite. And there's such great vulnerability. There's such openness in Lucille Clifton's work. And I think that has often inspired me to be bold, to be courageous, and to just kind of go there on the page and not hold anything back. Because I think in those ways, that's how we connect as humans, right? Like, we can all experience grief, we can all experience joy. And if we bear ourselves to the moment and to the page, then we're connecting through that page to other people. And so I think about Lucille's vulnerability, and I think about tenderness being the ability to be vulnerable, to open up and to be courageous. And yeah, her work always leads me.
Well, I'm right there with you in both accounts, both what Jane said and both what Terri said, because yes, it's hard to come to such vulnerable feelings as tenderness, because tenderness really does put you out there in that way. And, the difference between tenderness and sentimentality is a huge gap.
Yeah.
So, how do you get to the authentic feeling of, this vulnerable feeling of tenderness? Well, I think you both did a great job answering my hard question. And I wonder if there's any other questions that anybody else detected. I've been watching the stream of comments, and both of you, Terri and Jane, you'll want to save the chat so you can have a look at all of the wonderful things people have been saying about your work. Let's see, I'm looking to see if there's a question here from anybody.
I think Betsy Holloman has a hand raised.
Okay.
So I don't know if we'd have to.
But can Betsy put that into the chat? I don't know if we can. Henry, you could probably release her so she could ask the question, but she's not showing up in video form.
I've asked her to unmute.
Okay. Well, if she doesn't unmute in a second, then we will, I guess, wrap up because I don't see any other questions.
Jane, I do have a question kind of sort of for Jane. And Jane, the pastoral plays such a huge role in your work. Can you talk a little bit about that? And are there specific poets you read to get an understanding or different sense of the landscape? So I'm just so curious because it's the way you write about the world. I mean, it almost falls into eco poetry for me because it's uplifting the natural world. So I just would love to hear a little bit more from you about that.
Yeah, thanks, Terri. I mean, one of the things, of course, is that I grew up on a farm and, so I lived on a farm for 17 years until I went to Dublin. And so when I started to write, that's where I went back to, the way early poetry often is autobiographical. You find yourself going back to the very early. So that's what happened when I started to write. But then, and also when I was writing, I was living in Wicklow. We had moved to Wicklow. So, the hills are in front of me, the fields are around me. I'm walking every day in that. So I think it's very natural that I would reach to there for my imagery, for metaphor, to make sense. But I suppose, the thing what you were saying about eco-poetry, I really remember hearing Michael Longley saying that every time, whenever a poet writes nature poetry, nowadays that is inherently eco-poetry because you're helping people get in touch with what they love, and we want to protect what we love. And that's what any kind of nature writing in a way does, so I really like that way of seeing that it doesn't have to be specifically political and yet be political, even though it doesn't seem to be, because if it arouses feelings of love, that's what makes us want to protect our environment, Yeah. But I mean, I suppose that was, the question I was going to ask you about was the Let Me In, the poem about anger, the goddess of anger. I thought that was just so powerful, Terri. And I was thinking about where do you see that, because we started talking about tenderness, but you're also saying about the importance of letting ourselves be angry, and particularly women, so how do you see them? Where does anger meet tenderness and vice versa?
Ooh, that's a hard question. I know, and I'll back into it. I'll just say, I know that when the goddess of anger kind of presented itself as a poem, I literally woke up one morning with the words "let me in" my head. I knew that I wanted to speak to ways in which women have had to sublimate their anger and just swallow it.
Yeah.
And even now watching films with my tween, she's 12, and I watch movies from the, from the 50s, 40s to now. When we get to those older movies, I have to stop and explain the sexism and explain the racism, and just even in the 80s and 90s, you know, stuff that we endured then, we would not endure now.
Yeah.
And I think about that anger. And so to think about tenderness, I think we get angry when we have exposed who we are and we are treated so brutally, so roughly. Right. And that is kind of where that tenderness comes in. And I think you can only be really angry in some points because you exposed yourself. You were open, looking for something else. You're looking for love. You're looking for appreciation. And instead what you got was a fist, you know, and when you were just looking for a hug or a handshake. And that's kind of, I think, where tenderness and anger can meet. I think you can only get that righteous fury when you're like, I really went to you for love and I came back with bruises, and that's not how this should be.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you, Terri. Yeah, that's fabulous.
So there's just one little question for Jane from Barbara Goldberg, and we have very few minutes, but Jane, this is the question. So what caused you to start writing after, you know, at age 40?
Okay, very briefly, I always wanted to write, but I thought I couldn't. And I just said, well, look, I'll give it a go. And I suppose I had more time in my life then. I was more settled and I was living in the country. I had just more time, but I gave it a go. I followed what I wanted, what I did, what I desired, followed my desire. So I'd say that to others. Follow your desire.
Very good. Very good. Okay, I'm turning it back to Henry, and thank you all for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. What a wonderful reading. Thank you, Jane and Terri and Ellen, for moderating, and Henry, always thanks to you, and Michael.
Okay, so it's almost 1:30 in Ireland, and I hope you enjoyed this evening's readers. We will extend. I hope you will extend your enjoyment of this of their readings by purchasing books and letting others know about this series. I have put links throughout the reading into the chat. I hope you take advantage of that. If you would like to see this reading again, you can. It'll be up on our YouTube channel. It'll be up tomorrow. So come by our homepage on our site, and you'll be able to see the reading again. So come back on Wednesday, March 24, 2021, when our series Poets versus the Pandemic will be presenting poets Luther Jett, reading from his new book, Everyone Disappears, along with our guest poets, Sherry Lawrence Flieger and Carolyn Wright. And we'll be back here again with Café Muse on April 5, 2021, with Marguerite Little and Joseph Ross. So everybody, it's been a wonderful reading. Good night, and stay safe.